Hi, friends. Oh, sorry about all of the issues that we are having with Blackboard. But the good news is, I think I'm going to be a famous YouTuber after this. Well, let's go ahead and talk about the things that we were going to talk about in class today. And just make sure that you guys get some little bit of practice with these areas. So the first thing that we were talking about in our spiral review class was the need to be able to count, compare, a collection of pennies, nickels, dimes, and quarters whose total value is $2 or less. So we practiced that a little bit this year, but Star 360 Math kind of pinpointed an area of weakness for our second graders, and that is the second part of being able to use the cent symbol, the dollar symbol, and the decimal point correctly. So we want to be able to practice that a little bit today. And this is something that you guys can practice at home um, a little bit every day. You can just grab your coin jar, give your student a handful of change, have them count it up, and then be able to write it correctly. So let's practice that a little bit together. So if we were to look at, sorry, if we were to look at these coins over here, we could say, I usually always recommend counting the biggest ones first and maybe even grouping them in grouping them, like I always group 4 quarters together to count it as a dollar, or I'll group 2 dimes and 1 nickel together to make another quarter. So I try to make groups of 25 and then I count the rest. So you can see here there's 1, 2, 3, 4 quarters, and then 10, 20, 25. So this is kind of the same thing as another quarter. So it makes it a little bit easier to count. You could say 25, 50, 75, a dollar, $1.25, $1.26. Okay, so then what you would do is you would write that with the dollar symbol, $1.26. Okay, it's kind of small there, but so you want to make sure that you use the dollar symbol at the front and that decimal point. Okay, there we go. All right, and so then let's move over to this one. This is a 25 and a 25, and I could group these together. 25, 2 tens and a 5 is like a quarter, and then 2 tens and a 5 is like another quarter. So 25, 50, 75, a dollar. And then $1, $2, $3, $4. So we would have $4. So let's go ahead and drag this over here, but now it's going to look like this. $4. You don't want to just put a 4 because then that's going to be kind of like 40 cents. So you want to make sure you put a 0 for the tens column, the tenths column. Okay, so $1.04 versus $1.26. And so then you're going to need to be able to weigh those and see which one is worth more, and then be able to compare those. So if we did that, we could say that $1.26 is greater than $1.04. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead. I'm going to move down to this example here, specifically number 8 here. Let's count how much money. 10, 20, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 51, 52, 53. Okay, so now 53 cents. There's no dollars, so there's going to be two different ways that we could type this. So let me show you what that would look like. You could either say dollar sign, oops, dollar symbol, no dollars, and what did we say, 53 cents. Okay, so that's one way that you can do it. So if you're going to use that dollar symbol, you want to make sure you say that there's $0. Okay, and then you put the decimal point before the change. Okay, and now the other way to do this is without this part. And we can say 53 cents. So let me see if I can find that symbol. 53 cents. I think you guys know what that looks like. It's just like a little C. It's not really it, but we could use this. There we go. That's really big. Okay, 53 cents. Those are the two ways that you can write it if there's no dollars. Okay, so the cent sign would come after it, and the dollar sign comes before it. Okay, so just try to remember that. And that's really the most important thing. We should be able to count money up to $2 with a bunch of different arrangements of coins up to $2 and take two amounts and compare them, and then to be able to write the amounts correctly. Okay, so those are the things that you want to be practicing at home with money. Okay, back again. Now this is what we were going to talk about in guided math today. This is a new topic and it's one of my favorites. I just love shapes. So in second grade, we need to be able to identify, describe, compare and contrast plane and solid shapes. So we want to look at a circle and describe it and compare it to a sphere. How are they the same? How are they different? Take a square, be able to describe it, and a cube, describe these two things, and talk about how are they the same and how are they different. And then finally, a rectangle and a rectangular prism. Okay, so those are the 6 shapes that we're focusing in on in second grade. Now, you can see here, you guys all have received a box of shapes like this from K-12. And these are the 3 that you want to be real familiar with. The white one, the red one, and the yellow one. Okay, so we're going to be talking about these today. So if you want, you could pause this video and go get your box. I think that would be really helpful if you had these in your hand as we're talking about them, because we're not just going to identify, oh, that's a cube. We're going to be very specific and talk about the different features that are on a cube. Okay, so I think it's really helpful. So go ahead and pause this and go try to find those, okay? But before we get to the 3-dimensional shapes, we're going to talk about 2-dimensional shapes. And another way to say that is plane figures. Okay, so here are the 3 plane figures that we're focusing in on second grade: a circle, a rectangle, and a square. Okay, so let's talk about the definition of a plane figure. So a plane figure is any closed 2-dimensional shape. So closed means it's like if there were a bunch of little ants inside of it, they would not be able to get out. It's not open. And a two-dimensional shape is like a drawing on a piece of paper. It's flat, there's no thickness to it at all. Okay, so let's look at two examples here. One of these is not a plane figure. Now this one is closed. See that? And it's flat, and it's a two-dimensional shape that is like drawn on a piece of paper. That is a plane figure, but this one is not because it's not closed. You see one end here and one end here. If they folded it up and those two ends touched, then it would be a plane figure, but this one is not. Okay, so that's our first definition that we want to be able to know is what a plane figure is. It's a closed two-dimensional shape. Another word that we need to know is a vertex. So a vertex is a point where two or more line segments, lines, or rays meet to form an angle. So on this shape here, you can see one right there. Here's two line segments that come together and meet right here. And it makes a little point. It's like a little pointy part. That's not the official name. The official name is vertex. Okay. And one little helpful thing that I have thought about in the past to remember, but look at the first letter of vertex. With that V, it creates a little point. So that's how I remember that is the pointy part of the shape. So if you're talking about just one of the pointy parts, you would say vertex. Okay? But if you're talking about more than one, you would change the word a little bit and say vertices. Okay? Vertices. All right, so here's an example of one. Here's an example of a vertex. And here's another example of a vertex. So if you were to look at this whole shape, how many vertices are there altogether? There'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay? All right, so that's a word that we need to be able to talk about. So if I was describing this shape already, I have 3 things I could say. I could say it is a two-dimensional shape, it is closed, and it has 5 vertices. All right. All right, so the next word that we are going to use to describe two-dimensional shapes is side. And it's basically the line segment that connects two vertices. So here's a vertice, and here's a vertice. So this line in between is called the side on a plain two-dimensional figure. It's called something else when you get into the solid shapes. But for a flat, plain figure, we're going to call them sides. Okay, now the next thing that we want to talk about is an angle. So they kind of all go together. The sides, when they are intersecting and creating that vertex, they're also creating an angle. So an angle is formed by two rays that share a common endpoint called the vertex. Angles are found whenever lines or line segments intersect. So here we have two line segments intersecting, creating that beautiful vertex that we just talked about, right? But it's also creating an angle. So this part here is what you would call the angle, the space in between. And then when you get up into the upper grades, you're going to start measuring those and deciding if it's a right angle, an acute angle, or an obtuse angle. You're going to learn all kinds of really fun ways to describe triangles. But for right now, we just need to know that it has an angle. So on this figure that we see before us, we see 3 sides. 1, 2, 3. We see 3 vertices. 1, 2, 3. And we see 3 angles. 1, 2, 3. All right. So let's talk about our 3 figures that we need to know. Our 3 plane figures. The first one is a circle, and the fancy way to describe a circle is it's a set of points in a plane. You can't see them. They're all along the part that you are drawing when you draw a circle. There's a bunch of points, and they are the same distance from the center. So it makes a perfect circle. It's not a lopsided circle. It's not an oval. You know, it's a perfect circle because they're all the same distance from the center. Okay, so if I were to describe this one, how many sides does this circle have? 0. There's no straight parts, is there? How many vertices? How many pointy parts? A circle doesn't have any pointy parts. There are 0 vertices. And angles? Well, if there's no sides and no vertices, there's not going to be any angles. So this is how we can describe a circle. We could say this definition, we could say, well, it's a set of points that are all the same distance from the center. We could say it's a 2-dimensional plane figure that's closed. We could also say it has 0 sides, 0 vertices, and 0 angles. And boy, would we sound smart. We don't have to just say, it goes like this. No, we have some really intelligent ways to describe it. Okay, let's go to our next plane figure, and it's called a rectangle. So a rectangle is a quadrilateral with 4 right angles. Now, a quadrilateral, which you will learn, I think you get into that in 4th grade. A quadrilateral is a shape with 4 sides, and there's a lot of them. There's a rhombus, a trapezoid, a square, a rectangle. So there's a lot of them, and they're all quadrilaterals because they have 4 sides. They're just different. Their features are different. So that's why you really want to describe a quadrilateral correctly, because you could be talking about a square when you really want to be talking about a rectangle. All right, and so a rectangle is a special quadrilateral with 4 right angles. And right angle means it's 90 degrees. So if you were to draw, let me see, if you were to draw a little square, it would fit perfectly in the corner because it's 90 degrees. It's just this perfect little corner. Okay, so it has 4 right angles. So you're going to notice when you get into the upper grades that a rhombus does not have 4 right angles. A trapezoid does not have 4 right angles. So there's differences in all the quadrilaterals. Okay, so we can see here that there's 1, 2, 3, 4 sides. And because of those 4 sides, it creates 1, 2, 3, 4 vertices. And since there's 4 vertices, there's 4 angles that are also created. And we know that they're right angles, which means they're 90 degrees. If you got a compass and you or a protractor, then you would be able to put that protractor right there and be able to measure that it's 90 degrees. All right, so now we're able to describe a rectangle. We could say a rectangle is a quadrilateral with 4 right angles. And it has 4 sides and 4 vertices and 4 angles. And it's a plane, closed. Those ants aren't getting out of that. A closed figure. Wow, look at us describing that like an intelligent mathematician. Okay, and our last plane shape that we really want to be able to describe and know well is a square. Now, did you know that a square is a rectangle? I know that's going to blow your mind, but it is. It's a special kind of rectangle. So a square is a quadrilateral because it has 4 sides, and it is a rectangle because it has 4 right angles. But a square is a special kind of rectangle. Did you notice any differences? Look at this, rectangle, square. A square is special because all 4 sides are the same exact length. So if I were to take a ruler out and measure that, all 4 of those would be the same length. Now in a rectangle, it doesn't necessarily have that. Okay, it just says that a rectangle has to have 4 right angles. But in order to be called a square, you have to have 4 sides that are the same length. Okay? Okay, but they also have a lot in common. So they are going to have those 4 sides, 4 vertices, and 4 angles, just like a rectangle. But if someone were to ask you, what's the difference? A square is a special kind of rectangle that has to have 4 of the same size of sides. Okay, so we've gone through the 3 types of plane figures that we really need to know. Now let's get to the fun part, which is the solid figures. So go ahead and get these out. If you have them nearby so we can talk about them. Okay, so first of all, a solid figure, which is another way of talking about a 3-dimensional shape. It has length, width, and height. So it's something that you can measure this way, and this way. So if it was open, you could pour a liquid inside of it. Okay, it's actually something that you would hold in your hand, and it's solid. So there's 3 different ways to measure. So length, width, and height. Okay? All right, so let's look at our first feature. A face. And that is the flat side of a solid figure. So you can see on this one, it's this flat portion right here. That is called a face. And if you just look at one face on a cube, you can see it's a square. And so a cube is made of squares put together. Okay? So that's what you want to be able to talk about, is the face of a solid figure and describe the shape that it is, because that's going to be part of naming your solid figures. Okay, so now we know one feature of a 3-dimensional shape, and that's a face. There's an example of it right there. Just that little front part, that's the face. So if you're going to look at this, you might be asked, how many faces does a cube have? Then you want to go around very carefully and count them. Go around all the sides and then count the top and count the bottom. So there are 6 faces on this one. All right. Now the other thing that we need to talk about is the edge. So remember, in a 2-dimensional shape, we talked about sides. Well, in a 3-dimensional shape, we call those edges. And that's where those sides meet together. So this side makes this edge. This side coming together with this side makes this edge. Okay, so that's an edge right there. So take yours and touch the edges, because we need to be able to count how many edges our shapes have. That's an edge. Okay, so it's the line segment where two faces meet. Okay, that's where they're intersecting. All right, so if we were to look at this shape kind of like it was hollow, now you can clearly see those edges. Every one of those black lines is an edge. So let's count them. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, so we have 12 edges on the picture that we see there. Okay. And this is the similar thing between two-dimensional shapes and three-dimensional shapes, because the pointy parts are still called a vertex. And if there's more than one, it's called vertices. How many vertices does this shape have? So we need to be able to count how many vertices they have. So on this shape here, you can see the vertices right there. Just the corners, that's the pointy parts. So if you were to count all of these, you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this shape would have 8 vertices. Okay, and here's a picture of all 3 things that we need to know about a shape. We need to recognize the face, the edges, and the vertices, or the pointy parts. Okay, so we have 3 solid shapes that we really want to know in 2nd grade. And the first is the cube, which is your red one. So go ahead and pick up your red one. And go ahead and look. We looked at this a little bit earlier. Can you count how many faces it has? Count how many faces it has. Just keep turning it around. Don't forget the top and don't forget the bottom. So there are 6 faces. Okay, so a cube is a solid figure with congruent square faces. So all the faces are squares and all the squares are the same exact size. That's what makes it a perfect cube. So all of the edges are the same length. Because if they're not, then it becomes something different. Okay, and then the edges, we counted earlier, there were 12 edges on a cube. 12 edges. Can you find them on yours? 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you go around the top. 5, 6, 7, 8. Then go on the bottom. 9, 10, 11, 12. Another way to do that, if you want, with the permission of your learning coach, is to take a marker and draw along your shape. Draw the edges as you count them, just to make sure you don't miss any. That's one thing that you could do. Okay, and then the vertices, like we talked about, are the pointy parts. There's 4 here, and then there's going to be 4 here. So 8 total vertices. Oops. 8 vertices. Okay. All right, and then we're going to go to our next one, which is a rectangular prism, which is your yellow one. Go ahead and pick that one up. It's a solid figure which all faces are rectangles. So you can see that face looks like a rectangle. That face looks like a rectangle. This face looks like a rectangle. All of the faces are rectangles, so they call it a rectangular prism. And that's important because you could have a face on a prism that might be a triangle, and it would be a triangular prism. So there's lots of different types of prisms. But if it has a rectangle here on the face, then it's going to be a rectangular prism. Okay, so a rectangular prism and a cube are very similar because they both have 6 faces, they both have 12 edges, and they both have 8 vertices. The difference is the shapes of the faces. That's the difference. So 12 edges, 6 faces, and 8 vertices. Okay. Now the next shape is pretty simple to describe. A sphere. A sphere, which is your white one, which I'm sure you're very familiar with the sphere because we see this a lot in real life when you're playing basketball, soccer, tennis. You have a sphere. You wouldn't want to try to play basketball with a cube, would you? Or a rectangular prism? I don't think you could bounce that very well. So a sphere is a solid figure with all of its points the same distance from the center. Pretty much the same exact definition of a circle, except this is a solid figure. So if I were to drill a little hole, I could put liquid inside and carry it around. You can't do that with a plane shape because that's like a drawing on a piece of paper. This is solid. Okay, and guess what? These are really easy to describe because they have 0 faces. There's no flat surfaces, is there? There's 0 edges, and there are 0 vertices. Very, very similar to a circle, right? They're just all smooth and round. The only difference is a circle is a plane shape, which is flat, and a sphere is 3-dimensional solid. Okay, so I'm going to let you guys kind of think about this with your learning coach, maybe talk about it. What are the differences between a circle and a sphere, and what do they have in common? Think about that. Maybe pause it and talk about it. And then think about a square and a cube. How are they the same and how are they different? And then talk about a rectangle versus a rectangular prism. What's the same about them and what's different about them? All right, so here's some other examples of some plane shapes that you're going to be learning about over the years. Look at all the yellow ones. The yellow ones are all the quadrilaterals, and they all have very specific definitions. So those are kind of fun to dig into. And the pentagon, hexagon, heptagon, octagon, nonagon, decagon, you're going to learn about those in 4th or 5th grade. So those are really fun to learn about too. Okay, so those are all drawings, right? Those are flat, those are plain. You can't pick it up and pour liquid inside of it or anything like that. But if you were to talk about 3-dimensional shapes, those are the kinds that you see a lot of times in real life. You're going to see a Rubik's Cube. You're going to see a soccer ball. You're going to see a cereal box. You know, you're going to see these shapes in real life all the time. A globe is a sphere. Now, this is a cone, and this is a pyramid. We don't necessarily have to know those for second grade, but those are good to know as well. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and send this video out to you guys. By the way, I hope you have a wonderful Valentine's Day. I was hoping to be able to wish you a happy Valentine's Day in class today, but I'm sure you guys will have lots of people to show your love to. You can do something special for mom and dad or your siblings, your neighbors. Just love on each other. It's a special time of the year. And then in the same email where I'm putting this video, I'm going to put the link to go ahead and take a little quiz about the 2D and 3D shapes. Okay? Okay, well, don't worry. We will practice with these a lot in our spiral review class. I'm sorry we weren't able to meet live today, but this is a pretty decent alternative. All right, I hope you guys have a wonderful day and a beautiful, loving Valentine's Day. All right, bye-bye.